US President Barack Obama begins a visit to Asia next week, with stops in Japan, South Korea, Malaysia and the Philippines. In part, it's expected the President will use the visit to reassure allies over budget cuts to the American military. Tellingly, the nations on his itinerary all have ongoing territorial disputes with China. President Obama will also discuss trade and, in particular, speeding up the Trans-Pacific Partnership with the various leaders. We're joined by Gordon Flake, the founding CEO of the Perth-based USAsia Centre. Gordon Flake, thank you very much for joining The World. Some commentators have drawn a link between the lack of US intervention in Syria creating some nervousness among Asian allies who want the security of US support, if necessary, against China. To what extent do you see this as a visit of reassurance?
Inevitably, any visit of a U.S. president to Asia will be a visit of reassurance. Our allies in the region are constantly seeking evidence of American attention and focus. The events of Syria clearly have heightened that attention. I would add to that, of course, the events more recently in the Ukraine and particularly the Crimean Peninsula. And so they're always looking for evidence that the U.S. remains committed and actively committed as an ally, particularly in the face of what's going on right now in the South China Seas and Chinese efforts to be a little bit more proactive in asserting their claims in that region.
Absolutely. So given that all of President Obama's stops to countries in dispute with China, is that a little bit of a red rag?
I would actually kind of slice that a little bit differently. There are three treaty allies in the region that President Obama will be visiting: Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. And then Malaysia, an important player in ASEAN itself, while not a treaty ally, an important country in the region for President Obama to be visiting. But I don't think that they're being visited primarily because of their disputes.
And with Japan weighing up its 21st century military role, how will the US place Japan, do you think?
Japan's concerns obviously aren't primarily driven by their, alleged militarization or their focus on becoming a more normal nation, but really out of rising tensions surrounding the Senkaku Islands, which are islands that Japan insists are indisputably theirs, which China has increasingly been raising the tensions over and putting pressure upon Japan, trying to raise doubt about Japanese control over those islands. That's something that I think the Japanese are going to be looking to hear from the United States on. They're constantly seeking reassurance that those islands fall under the security treaty they have with the United States. And what better way to do that than to have the President of the United States in Japan on a formal state visit, the first state visit since Bill Clinton in 1996.
Much was made of the US-Asia pivot, but since then the United States has been focused on domestic issues and other international issues elsewhere. Is the pivot still on or not?
Asia policy, Asia alliance relationships are really one of the last few bipartisan areas of agreement in Washington, D.C. The diplomatic leg of the pivot, really was centered upon President Obama's decision to come to Asia not just once a year for the APEC summit, but twice a year for the East Asia summit as well. And so last year, when due to domestic problems at home in October, he missed not only the APEC summit, but the East Asia summit. It really raised concerns about the diplomatic leg. Him coming not only this April, but again in the fall for the G20 meeting in Brisbane and for the next East Asia summit in Burma, really I think will put that to rest. That leaves the third leg of the pivot, which is his focus on economic issues. And in that regard, this visit could not be more timely. We're trying to bring to conclusion the negotiations over the TPP, or Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it's at a critical phase. And so both in his visit to Japan and his visit to Southeast Asia, I think that will be the real test of that third and most active leg of the rebalancing towards Asia, or the pivot towards Asia.
Yes, I'd like to talk to you about the TPP. The US Chamber of Commerce in Asia says that Australia has jumped the gun in its free trade agreements last week, selling itself short ahead of the TPP. Can President Obama hope to clinch any sort of deal or step forward that might actually fulfil that criticism, if you like?
I actually don't see this as an Australia versus United States thing. Australia was an early leader in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The United States has kind of adopted that as, again, as the third leg or the economic focus of its rebalancing or pivot towards Asia. I in almost every regard, see Australia and the United States as partners with a shared interest in trying to bring the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations to a successful conclusion.
Gordon Flake, we appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to the world.
My pleasure. Thank you.